My name is Simapolo, and following weeks of demonstrations and protests in Kenya, there has been growing concerns in Uganda about its impact and possible or potential spillovers in Uganda, especially if the protests in Kenya may interrupt the trade on this side and the supply chain, especially due to the fact that most of the imports to Uganda go through Kenya. And from the statement by government, it looks like all is well. And the Prime Minister, Right Honorable Robin Anabanja, presented a statement to Parliament in which she indicated that there should be no need for panic because, according to them, there are no indicators that there will be any spillovers of these protests. And actually, she said that the demonstrations withstanding, trade remains normal and the supply chains remain so efficient. But we need to interrogate this matter and count the cost of the protest in Kenya on Uganda. Let's join Mr. Godfrey Oundo. And Godfrey Oundo is the chairperson, cross-border trade, and is also the regional chairperson for COMESA in charge of the East African region. Let me talk to Mr. Godfrey Oundo, and I ask him, Godfrey, if you can tell us exactly what is happening across our borders, the border of Busia and the Maraba border, and give us possibly a status report of the trade across those borders currently. Okay, I will, of course, catch up with him, and we need to hear from the people in charge and tell us exactly what is on the ground. And Godfrey Oundo is one of those people we expect that he has ears on the ground, both on the Kenyan borders of Busia and Malaba, and he'll be telling us exactly what is happening in terms of trade, the flow of traffic across all those borders, and more especially the concerns in Uganda about the goods, the movement of people and services, and more especially in the areas of fuel, because fuel that is used in Uganda most, and if I may say, the huge lot goes through Kenya, and fuel determines what happens with the economy. If the fuel prices increase, then automatically the cost of goods and essential services will also rise. Mr. Godfrey Oundo, I was seeking a status report from you. You must have ears on the ground. What is happening across our borders, Busia and Maraba?
Yeah, thank you, Apollo, and good evening, viewers. Like you have just asked, ever since Kenya started the protests, it is now 2 weeks ago when Kenya started the protests, and so far not so good. The traffic flow is not good. Traffic flow in terms of vehicles and people traveling across the two countries is not good. For example, if I could talk about the traffic of trailers which bring in cargo and goods like petroleum products. We used, before the Kenyan protest, we used to have around 1,000 trucks crossing each day from Kenya to Uganda and the other way around, crossing back to the other part. But since the protest started, especially on the very days protest takes place, you will hardly get any single truck crossing. And what does this imply? Even equally, Uganda has been exporting, it is perishables, like fresh foods, pineapples, fruits, fresh fish, etc., through the Busia border and Malava to our market in Kenya. But ever since the protest started, once it is a protest day, Ugandans will not have their goods taken to Kenya. Neither will the fuel trucks carry the fuel to Uganda side. And this, in the long run, we are in the second week of the protest. In the long run, if this continues, there is a likelihood of having fuel shortages. And if we begin now having fuel queues in the country, when our vehicles can't access fuel within the country, what will happen? The fuel prices at the fuel stations will increase. And if it increases, the passenger prices in the cars will definitely subsequently also increase. The other issue also affecting Ugandans by these protests is the traffic flow from the two countries. We used to have, before the protests started, we used to have a frequency of around 12 buses crossing a border from either side to the other. These inter-trust buses, like those
Okay,
ones
Mr. Undo,
access
can you tell us if
cities like
you,
Nairobi,
the
Kampala.
people
Yes.
who are in charge, can you tell us if you have taken note
Yes.
of what is happening and tried to count the cost and probably tell us how much we have lost in terms of money and the volumes of trade? Do you have the figures?
Currently, we don't have the estimates, but we are still relying on what the Kenyan government gave in as a trade flow between the countries around the EAC. And the Kenyan government was giving a statistics of $2 billion lost between trade between Kenya and its counterparts. And as a country, we are going to undertake a process to undertake the process of finding out how much we have lost in these protests. But definitely, like I've mentioned, it's a lot we are losing because, for example, what has been going on as the export and import trade along one border of Uganda with Kenya. For example, if I could take a border like Busia or Malava, at each day transactions of almost 4 billion Uganda shillings have been taking place in each day. And if a border is closed, this simply means the trade flow is affected by 4 billion Uganda shillings per day. And if these protests are now taking shape from one day, as it was initially started, like this current week, it has flown to the second day. That means the estimated loss would be going to almost 8 billion shillings per each border at the volume, in the effects of the volume of trade along the border.
Mr. Undo, are you saying the indicators are visible? We are losing in terms of trade, in terms of cross-border trade along our borders?
Yes, we are really losing as a country because you will also agree with me, Apple, that, for example, border communities have, because of their proximity at the borderline, they have what we call free trade area. A free trade area is where a Kenyan, for example, has accessibility to Ugandan country or land with something like 10 to 15 kilometers. Then a Ugandan also has accessibility to a Kenyan land with the 10 to 15 kilometers. That's what we call a free trade area. And in this area, we anticipate that a Ugandan can travel the other side, either do the shopping and come back without going through other legitimate requirements of a passport, an interstate permit, and those other obligations. Even if it is a car, he may only need to get a gate pass. But now, if this kind of scenarios continue and exists, this free movement is not allowed, and there is borders are boosted up with the security. Ugandans, of course, we have been earmarked as part of the people who could be causing issues in Kenya, as talked behind the sceneries in Kenya. And this in itself puts Ugandans in the fear. If you remember Bwana Apollo, the recent protests we had in Kenya, Ugandans who had taken their merchandise to Kenya had huge losses, and the losses which were accounted at that material time were over 17 billion dollars. And the Kasita traders, they have now expounded the area of operation to be Kasita Uganda. What they started making a claim for the Ugandans who had incurred this loss in Kenya. And up to date, even when there was bilateral engagement with the Kenyan government to have the traders who had lost through the protests, says some of which their cars were being burnt down, some of which their merchandise were being burnt down, looted, stolen, those kind of scenarios. Efforts have been fertile up to date to have these people compensated the loss they incurred. So the English people say once bitten, twice shy. You remember when such a scenario happened and people lost, that particular kind of trader, you can't expect that person again when he hears of a protest in Kenya to able carry his merchandise across the border. He will have to wait. Yeah, yesterday I was having interactions with people in my office in Kampala, and they really wanted to travel to Nairobi to do their normal businesses, but because of this protest, they are fearing. They want to be there 2-3 days to do the shoppings, but any other day now that previously when the protest was one day, it could easily not affect them, but now how do they get to be affected? For example, on the first day, when somebody travels and the protests are on a Monday, it's the second day on Tuesday, you are not certain whether the condition will normalize or not. So by the third day, you begin to think of traveling, which could be a Wednesday. Again, there is preparation for another protest on Thursday. So generally, the whole scenario runs up to the protest of a full week. And if this scenario continues, it's going to have a likely long outstanding effects on economies, not only for Kenya as a country, but for Uganda. Look at a scenario, for example, the Kenya shilling had dropped. And the reason of why the Kenyan shilling had dropped, because as this protest go on, a trade doesn't move. And when the trade doesn't move, the shillings also begins depreciating. And Kenya needs also to take a lot to its foreign market so that its shilling can appreciate. And if it doesn't take a lot, then its shilling depreciates. And if it depreciates, those Kenyan traders who are interested to come and trade in Uganda, of course, they will need a lot of Kenyan money to buy Ugandan products. And if they have to buy Ugandan product at a higher value of the shilling, then they will even not come to do trade with Uganda. So this is indirectly also affecting Uganda in the sense that a Kenyan trader who could want to come and buy Ugandan grain or cereal on the Ugandan market, he will chicken out because of that fear of the devalued shilling, which has been caused as a result of the inflation. And these are the long-lasting effects of this protest to the Ugandan economy and the economies in the EAC.
Okay.
You will agree with
Mr.
me
Undo.
that...
Mr. Undo, let's
yes.
talk about the proposals, especially in the Ugandan business community, that possibly we should be looking at alternative routes, especially for petroleum products and other essential goods that go through Kenya. What do you think? Should we or should Uganda be looking at alternative routes for these essential goods?
Yeah, Mr. Apollo, I do agree with you. This is a right step in the right direction. Why I think this is a right step in the right direction? Because you remember these protests this is not the first occurrence of this kind of protest in Kenya. We have ever had this. And Uganda as a country, we now need to think for plan B. We need to introduce cargo movement through water. For example, when we can have connectivity through Kisumu and Port Bell in Luzira. I'm happy with the initiatives of the government of Uganda, where they are trying to undertake a pilot of having cargo shifted or shipped from Kisumu to Port Bell. And the other day I was attentively listening to Honorable Michael Mukula, who was saying that they are having an alternative arrangement where that ship can carry 1,000 what the capacity of the trailers can carry. This in itself has two advantages in it. One, it will reduce on the damage on our roads. Then two, even fuel transport, water transport is cheaper. And it also reduces on the eventualities and accidents on our roads. So I would pray, and I would really say this plan B is good for us as a country to think of having the shipment through the lake. Then the other second alternative, of course, which we shall also again be left with, is importing our products through the port of Dar es Salaam. But this option, remember, it is a longer route. You have to move a longer distance from the port of Dar es Salaam to have your cargo in Kampala through Mutukula border. It is another second alternative, but if government of Uganda could also think deeply of exploring the first alternative I talked about, this would go a long way to mitigate the challenges which are coming with these protests in Kenya.
All right, Mr. Owondo, I am running out of time, and I would want you to make quick recommendations in the short term. What do you think government of Uganda should do to mitigate the effects of the protests in Kenya?
One, government of Uganda needs to sit with its fellow government in Kenya to urge them and discuss the effect of these protests. If they could understand, because they have just started, we are in the second week, we are not certain when are they going to end, how are they going to end, what are the effects at the end of the day. You have seen the effects of these protests within the country, Kenya itself, and in the long run they may also affect Uganda as a country. So to us, we are thinking that one, government of Uganda being an immediate beneficiary, because Kenya is our big brother in trade, we cannot afford to ignore Kenya see a role in trade with Uganda. So the first step government of Uganda needs to undertake is to discuss with government, it is the fellow government of Kenya, to ensure that they harmonize the political issues which are affecting Kenya. And if they can't talk as brotherly countries which neighbor each other, the other option could be we did not create the EAC block for fun. Even one of the purpose of the EAC is dispute resolution. The two conflicting political egos in Kenya could be brought to for mediation, and at least a solution be got for
Thank
what
you
they
so
are
much,
conflicting about
Mr.
in Kenya.
Oundo. Thank you so
Yes.
much. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for those elaborate submissions you've made. And we hope all goes well across our border, and hopefully things will normalize, and we see the trade activities across the borders normalize also. My name is Simapolo, and it's been all about the trade across our borders, especially after those Kenyan protests, which are now going into the third week. Let's catch up next week and hope for the best. Good evening and have a good night today.